Hello and welcome back to another episode of Scope Creepers. I'm your host today, Thomas Stewart, and I'm joined with my good friend Aramis. We're both game developers, quit our full-time jobs to create video games full-time. We both have good YouTube channels that are great YouTube channels that are both hovering around a similar subscriber count mark, about 7,000 each.
Somebody's
And
ahead right now, though.
yeah, but we're not keeping track. It's not a
It's not a
competition.
race, no.
Yeah. um, Last time we did this podcast, we talked about the minutia of quitting our full-time jobs and making video games full-time and kind of the risk factors involved with that, what our plan is to make it sustainable, all that jazz. If you want to check that out, you can go back into the YouTube archives and listen to that. Today, we're going to be talking about launching games. And I think it'll be a really interesting conversation because I've launched on numerous different platforms, and I'm interested to hear more about Aramis's experience about launching. I know that he's been doing a lot more of building in public and getting a lot of user feedback and testing through Steam and doing a lot of updates there and patching. So I think it'll be a really good conversation. Go over some of our history of publishing games and yeah. Without further ado, let's dive into it.
Sounds good.
So, I guess when it comes to publishing games, I let's just go through like our history real quick. Like if
Yeah.
you had to put a number on your games, how many would you say you've published?
How many games do I say I've published? Ooh. I don't consider little projects and or game jam games as published games. I would
Mhm.
categorize in my head as published games, for better or for worse, would be ones that have made some money. Or I
Mhm.
wanted people to pay for them, or they were like put onto a more official platform than itch.io. I don't know why that's the way it is in my brain, but that's how I categorize them. So I have I think we counted, I've probably done like eight online published games that are playable. And then of those, I would consider I've only published one, being Chess Survivors,
Mhm.
onto Steam.
Yeah,
Just Steam.
yeah. I've had a similar thoughts too. I usually use itch.io for like incomplete prototype projects, or like if I want somebody to play test it, I'll upload a build there and point people to it. But you have a more polished itch profile than I do. You actually have like fully fledged like game jam games. So I think that it would be fair if you consider those published, but it is a less of an arduous process than posting to other platforms for sure.
I also think it's a little bit different mental approach to it. Zen Selector, which I made last year or 2 years ago, was supposed to be like a mobile published game. And that was the first time I like put in a lot of thought and care into a a splash screen that says made by Aramis, a title screen that shows some buttons. I don't think that game had actual settings in it, but working through just a more polished, cohesive thing. And game jam games can have that as well, but I think my goal with a game jam game when I'm getting it ready to be published is like just good enough. Like just past that line of like, is this a title screen? Can you click play on the game? Can you go do the thing? It doesn't have
Yeah.
to be this like bigger publishing kind of thing of controller mapping and all these different like weird features like save states of games and stuff like that, where
Exactly.
I think an itch game, especially all mine are web builds, you don't get save states in games, right? There's no
Mhm.
file you can save on a web-based platform. So
Mhm.
interesting. So yeah, you've done, how many games have you published then in your head?
I didn't do the math beforehand, so I was trying to think. It's an interesting criteria to figure out to discern what you consider as like formally published as like generating income or making even a little bit of money. Because I started in the mobile world, so I had an Android app that I published for free, and there was no monetization. I put ads in it, and I think I made a few cents or whatever from like my two friends that played it, and then I switched to iPhone and published a few mobile games on that platform. So like three mobile games in total. And but that was like I didn't make any money off of any of those, but I still would consider those as published because mostly because the publishing process was very difficult and it
Mm-hmm.
it like you had to round out the game and pay some money to put it up on the store. So I would say like 3 mobile games, one Steam game, and then that one Steam game, Tanks But No Tanks, I have ported to PlayStation 5, Xbox. I'm currently in the the deep dive of porting it to PlayStation 4, and then also the Atari VCS. So I'm putting that one game on all those different platforms.
Mm-hmm.
I'm about to publish my second Steam game later this month. Um, and then I'm actually also in the midst of taking one of my old mobile games and starting to port that over to consoles. So it's like 3 mobile games, one Steam game, almost a second Steam game. So
And the
four or
one
five,
Steam
I would
game
say.
getting published on a handful of platforms as well,
Yeah.
right? Which for I've talked to you a lot about why you publish it, but for this podcast and the audience, like why are you publishing on so many different platforms? What is your goal there and kind of, just general, without breaking, I guess, I don't know if you've read through all of your terms and conditions with those different platforms,
Yeah.
but like what are you trying to do with all those different buckets
Yeah.
of places?
I mean, my goal is like, the games industry is a hit-driven industry, and you can have a breakout hit and you can sustain yourself that way. But I'm trying a different approach where I'm making smaller scoped games and trying to distribute them on a number of different platforms simultaneously so that
Mm-hmm.
I can just have all of these different revenue streams trickle in and they would amount to something substantial enough that I can pay my bills. So that's kind of my business plan. It's working out pretty well. It'll be interesting to see what the long tail is. When you launch a game, that's usually you have an initial launch spike on every platform, and we'll see. But I'm getting sales every day, and it's adding up. And I'm about to add a second game into that hamster wheel that just keeps the flywheel that keeps producing. So that's my goal is to try and get the same game into different demographics' hands and different platforms. So that each little bit of income drips in and I can keep doing this full time. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the goal.
Have you gone and found any platforms, I don't know if you can name them or not, that you will not be porting games over to again in the future? Or are the ones that you've kind of all, dip your toe in, ones you would go and do it again now that you've had some experience with them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I haven't found any. I plan on continuing to do as many platforms as possible just
Mm-hmm.
because I think it's worth it and it gets easier as I am doing things. Um, as far as difficulty, Steam and the Atari VCS are relatively easy
Yeah.
compared to platforms like Xbox and PlayStation. But yeah,
What makes them easy? What is like the big differentiation between like easy and a hard platform?
um, I think most of it is well, Steam is more linear. Like if you've ever uploaded a game to Steam, you have this checklist on the right side of the developer dashboard, and it
Yeah.
says these are the things that you need to do to publish, and you get a little check mark next to each one that you've done.
Mm-hmm.
And consoles don't have that, and you have to read through forums and documentation, and
Sure.
you have to at some point you even have to download engine packages and read like PDF files that come with those, and you have to figure out how to like search their intranet and then aggregate all of the information that you need to know and then kind of make that checklist yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can try and submit something and they will say no, you haven't done this yet, and so it's a lot more back and forth, whereas Steam in particular is you can do it self-guided, and I think it's pretty rare for people to talk to the Valve staff about launching their Steam game because it can be completely on the onus of the developer self-publishing. But with consoles, there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of contracts that you have to sign. You have to get dev kits in the mail. You have to. There's a lot just general questions that aren't clear from different documentation things. So that's kind of a high level of what makes it difficult for consoles.
Having only ever done basically Steam, it would be interesting to try to manage just like a code base of having different unique things that you have to do for each platform. do you have different repositories for different things like that? Or do you have like just crazy if statements of like, if we're in this engine, or like,
Yeah.
how are you
Yeah,
managing
that's
the
exactly
technical
right.
side?
There's a lot that goes into this. I could go into the weeds, because I think it's pretty interesting too. Normally, if you're familiar with using source control like Git, you will have like your main branch, and you just add commits to that branch, and that's like your main. Maybe you'll have a development branch and a publish branch, just to keep things easier for when you're updating the game. But with consoles, I have a different branch for each platform, right?
Sure.
And it worked out great for my first title, Tanks But No Tanks, because I did everything in isolation. So I did Steam, and then I ported it to, I can't remember which. I think I started with PlayStation, but I did them. I did PlayStation, then Xbox, then Atari VCS, and I launched PlayStation, Xbox simultaneously, and then I launched on Atari VCS. And that worked fine because I was able to. The game was done. I launched it on Steam. I got some feedback on bugs and stuff, and I patched that, and then I moved on to console porting. With one of the games that I'm porting right now, which is it's called Tile Cross, and it's like a little cube tile puzzle platformer sort of game. And uh, I've run into a lot of bugs because it was one of my first games I ever made. So the code base is atrocious, and there's the flow of everything is just it's disgusting and so difficult to work with and so bug ridden. And I'm trying to simultaneously port it to like three different platforms.
Sure.
And that's a mistake because what happens is I make some changes over on the PlayStation build, but then I realize when I'm testing the Atari build that this needs to get fixed, and then I have to cross it over and cherry pick commits and make sure that I have all of my source control cleaned up. Um, so that's like source control and like all of that jazz. But the actual code itself, I've written some helper scripts that do some really useful things. Like I have this component that I can add to objects in Unity that I call a conditional hide. And so I can say like, oh, if you're in this platform, hide this object. And so I just do that for every different thing. And it makes it easy so I can keep everything in one scene. But then if
Sure.
there's like a UI button or something that needs to be different, then I can just say only show this if you're in Xbox or whatever. So
And now that you've built out some of those patterns, you can copy and paste them into future projects as well.
yeah, I've built up a good toolbox of things that now that I'm working on subsequent games, it's going a lot faster than my first one.
That's one of the things with releasing games and having, even like if you keep prototyping games, you are building up your repository of things that you like the way you do them. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like each time I build a new game, I'm taking the best parts of the previous version and bring, like, it's like a meta progression of a video game where you're then like taking in some power and some power ups, and like now I have +5 movement speed for the next time I do like an audio engine, because I learned about that shit got annoying as I was finishing Chess Survivors. I'm going to do it differently so I can make it a little bit like just way easier, because if I had done it differently from the beginning, I could do it so much easier now.
Yeah.
Which is something I didn't think about when you're progressing your own XP
Yeah.
as you're building games and becoming a better and better dev.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if you're familiar with Matt Hackett. He's the guy who wrote the book How to Make a Video Game All by Yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a podcast that I listen to, and he was talking about, he uses the term a shell. And so he has like all of this what you would call meta progression as like a game engine shell. And so he takes the shell and moves it to his next project, and it has
Sure.
things like a title screen and options menu and localization tools and a save system and how to
Yeah.
handle music and all of the infrastructure that goes into having a game that he has built up over time. And he just uses that, and then he can put his core gameplay in the center of it.
God, just having like the way I like to save games, like just built into a repo that you just download and you know, install your new project and you're good to go would be so nice. Or like controller mapping is something that was like, I remember for Chess Survivors, changing controller mapping was so finicky and difficult, and it kept breaking.
Hmm.
people would report stuff. I'm like, I don't know why that happened.
Yeah,
I can't
yeah,
replicate it, but like,
yeah,
I believe you.
yeah, yeah.
Cool. I had a few questions prepared. I've been asking them slowly. What else do I got for you? Uh, we talked about your approach. What are some lessons you learned after releasing your first commercial game? I'm thinking specifically around tanks but no tanks, kind of being your
Hmm.
big. I would argue your big marquee release thus far.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
what are some big lessons that come to mind as you think back to that, and like as you're working on Bridges and Docks releasing, maybe things you've
Hmm.
been doing differently?
I mean, the biggest one that I took from Tanks But No Tanks is just scope creep, because it started as a hobby project,
That's the name
and
of the
so
podcast.
yeah, exactly. It's yeah, I'm well suited to be here because my name is Thomas and I am a scope creep addict.
Just take another hit of that scope creep.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and I think it's different now because I it's much more tangible where it's like, okay, I'm making video games full time. I need to make sure that I have a plan, that I have deadlines, that I am using money as a way to project timelines, and deadlines and due dates and all of that stuff. But initially, when I started my game Tanks But No Tanks, I had a full-time job. I was just working on it whenever I felt like it because I thought it would be fun. And so because of that, I followed the fun, which meant that as I was making it, if I got bored or I didn't like something, I would drastically change the gameplay. And it probably had three major uh, gameplay shifts where
Hmm.
it became a completely different game. And that is something that is just not feasible unless you have the time to put into it, which I don't for games that I make in the future. So I think pre-planning what the game should play like and feel like, and like be able to make smaller shifts as you go, because you can't design everything from the get-go. But
Yeah.
that's the major one. Is like I can't just if I get because as I'm testing, I get bored with my games, right? And I think that's going to happen with every game. And
Yes.
just because I'm bored with it, it's probably because I've spent, 400 hours, play testing it. Um, so that's a big one. I'm
I,
interested. Do you have any takeaways from chess survivors that are along the same vein?
I do have some takeaways. I think what you said struck home quite a bit as well of like before I did full-time game development, I was a serial prototyper where I would come up with an idea, burn hot and fast for a month on the idea or 2 months or 3 months or 6 months, and then get to the point when it gets hard. Get to the point when it gets unfun. Get to the point when it's like the first 50% of building a game is really quick and dirty. And you can like get there, you can run so fast, and then you start to have to like you like run into mud and it slowly gets slower and slower to make forward progress because hindsight is 2020 and you've changed designs and you've changed things, but like that system's now that's like the backbone of the project. You can't just rip the backbone out and put a new one in easily. And so you just keep wading through this mud. And that's oftentimes when I would quit. Sometimes because I would just really didn't make a good game. And so I get to the point where being like, I realized how dumb the game was I made or
Hmm.
how unfun it would be and just found something else. So back in 2022, quitting my job and accidentally getting into the point of making games full time and wanting to release a game really did that. Like it took me out of that. Well, I can't pivot. I'm trying to release a game and this is the one I decided to do. Let's keep pushing forward and getting it done.
Hmm.
So I think I agree with that of like, it's not even like, even my current mining game, it's not even in my brain of like, could I pivot to something else? I'm like,
Hmm.
no, I'm doing this game. I'm going to release it. I have plans of like, how much more work do I put into it after I release it? But like, I'm making this game. I'm not even considering not making it, which I think is very helpful to committing yourself to a project.
Yeah.
So that's something new about releasing games that I think I learned from Chess Survivors for sure. What else? What other lessons do I have? I think for me, it's like figuring out the it's about scoping, I think, is my biggest lesson, and like having a different tiered phase of scoping. And it's about how you like to do it. So I really like having this like 3-tier approach: demo scope, early access scope, and full release scope. It helps me like prioritize and bucket stuff in a really nice way. And I don't think early access works for every developer. It doesn't work for every game out there. But I found at least my games, early access works really well because then it makes me focus on getting a core of the game done. And then in my head, early access is building out content. So it like helps me figure out what is the most minimal viable product for this to be considered a game that someone could pay money for, still get value from, and see, oh, I could see how this game would be really fun. And their biggest complaint is, I want more content, right? Yeah. That's something, especially the types of games I'm making, really fits that model well for me to structure it in my head, where here's how I'm going to approach releasing it. And here's how I'll know I'll get there. That has helped me fight scope creep quite a bit. And then having these like ... scopes and these really fun ideas, they're like, oh my God, that'd be so cool to have in the game. And you ask yourself, is that necessary for it to be a minimal viable product? Is that necessary for it to be the demo? Is that necessary for it to be a full release? If the answer keeps being no, you're like, well, that could be something later. That could be version 1.5. I work on adding in this fun little system that is this side game, or, you know, a fishing mini game or some shit like that. So that's something I learned a lot, was like, I really liked going into early access for Chess Survivors. I think I learned it because I just released Chess Survivors in November because I ran out of money and I wanted to see if it could be a hit game before I got a new job. And spoiler, it didn't. It has sold a lot of copies, but I still needed to get a full-time job after releasing Chess Survivors. So then I was like, fuck it, I'll call it early access, and then I will go ahead and keep developing it as it becomes a hobby project again. So that worked really well for me and was probably one of my bigger lessons I learned from releasing a game.
Yeah, that's awesome. One of the questions that I have is around publishing numerous games versus focusing on one bigger game. And it's interesting because, you know, I'm leading up to the launch date of my new game, Bridges and Docks. And as a part of that, I'm trying to get all of my social media accounts prepped for that, right? And as part of that, you know, for Reddit, they have like a self-promotion rule where you can't be self-promoting your stuff. So I've been trying to engage in Reddit posts more regularly just so that it makes it, you know, so then when I have my launch splash, I can have my self-promotion post on Reddit. So I've just been like throwing up just like conversation stuff on Reddit. And one of the things that I said that, you know, I'm just like, what comes to mind? I'll just type it out, whatever. And I posted, is anyone consistently launching games every 3 to 6 months? It seems like the best strategy for indie devs to me. And I just said that just because that's kind of what my strategy is right now. I want to try and kick a game out every 3 to 6 months, have pretty small scoped games. And you know, that it actually got a lot of attention. It's got 116,000 views on it and almost 200 comments. And
116,000?
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So, you know, and this is just me trying to like prep my Reddit profile. It was just like a throwaway thought just to see what people thought about, you know.
Beautiful.
But it's interesting because people are very opinionated in the game dev community about passion projects and dream projects. And some people say like, yes, you need to make the game that you want to play. You should make your dream game, because otherwise you're going to burn out. You know, you should put however much time it takes, you know, put all your eggs in one basket. And other people are like, no, you need to learn how to finish games. You need to start small and work your way up. You know, even if it means making games that you're not super enthusiastic about, just learning how to scope your games well. So I'm interested what your thoughts are on that.
I would have a very hard time picking a project that I would be like, I need to work on this for 3 years.
Yeah.
I would have a very hard time doing that. Mostly because I don't have funding for 3 years would probably be the realistic answer there. But even so, I know I can make games in a year. I proved that to myself with shitty, terrible experience having never made a game before. I built Chess Survivors into early access in like 5 or 6 months. I could do it again in 3 months, I'm pretty sure. I could like rebuild Chess Survivors from the ground up and do a bunch of things differently, right? But like having those feelings, I'm like, okay, then I can do stuff in a year. Like I feel like I'm planning a tight timeline for my mining game, but I'm also like, I feel like I can see this like path forward. Like I don't know if you saw Dune 2 or anything like that. Dune 2, but like Paul Atreides like gets high on the Dune spice and he can like see this like path for. I'm starting to feel that with this game, and I'm trying to convince my community of that. I think on a daily basis, like I know where like this is gonna be really fun and cool, and I can do it in like 8 months, and I would have a very hard time doing it in 3 years. I think because I want to get feedback so much sooner. And like, I think that's why I do stuff publicly is because I want to get feedback sooner. I want to get like an idea of like, just because I think it's fun doesn't mean other people think it's fun. And small little tweaks to fun can make me realize, oh shit, that idea is way more fun than my idea. And dream game versus like a game in 3 to 6 months, I think it's really important to do a game. Just get a game out there and get it published. And like, get something out there, and it doesn't have to be your favorite game. I recommend a bullet heaven game, a Vampire Survivors-esque game where you can just scope the edges really evenly. You say, I want 10 abilities, I want 5 different enemy types, and you're going to have one level, and it takes 20 minutes to finish the level, and boom, you're done, right? And you can scope that really quickly and then produce that. If it's a hobby game, probably in a year or something like that, but you could publish that game on Steam. And there's a lot of people who love those games, and so you'll probably find some sales, and you'll learn through that process. I think the fallacy of making a dream game is hard. Like there's a lot of decisions you can make that increase the scope of your game really, really quickly. A big one I've been talking about a lot on stream is art assets. Like the type of art you pick for your game can dramatically like triple, 10x, 100x the amount of effort that goes into your game. I've seen plenty of really cool games like the one that Adam Sai is building on, what's it called? On his YouTube channel. I can't think of the name off the top of my head. Insignia. He's been working on that one for many, many years now. And it's because he's building beautiful, gorgeous art. And that game's going to get released, and it's going to do really well because he's crafting this like dream game with love and care. It's going to have a beautiful story, beautiful art. But it's taking him a long time to make good art. And for me as a non-artist, I need to pick art that can scale really quickly and easily. That if I build 100 enemies, it's not 1,000 assets. It's 100 assets, right? That it can still look good and match the mechanics I want to do without having to have this crazy scope. So I would say, realistically speaking, what I'm doing with my mining game here is going to be somewhere between dream game and like a game that I would call I would say like the 3 to 6 months is like making a feasible game, right? It's like this logic versus like, would that be like logos versus ethos argument or pathos? One of those things where it's like emotional versus logical. And I'm trying to like straddle that middle just perfectly where I really want to play this game, but I'm also going to build it in a way where I can do it quickly. I think I know where you fall on this question, but what are your thoughts around, like, 'cause I'm sure you have some ideas out there where like, these would be really cool dream games. What is your approach to, getting, because I think the dream would be we all eventually get to work on our dream games, but like, how do you get to work in your dream games? I think is where everyone differs. Some people like just do it, and some people are like iteratively get better and better and better. So someday you can do it. Where do you fall on kind of the spectrum?
I have so many game ideas. I have a huge document that's just like a huge running list of game ideas, and I would say I probably have 2 or 3 that I would qualify as like a dream game that if I had the time I would take years and I would make it amazing. But yeah, I intentionally hold myself back from that. One, because I don't have the time to make it how I'd want it, and sometimes too, this is getting less true now, but I also lack some of the technical skills or artistic skills to accomplish how I
Sure.
envision it. Um, there's a uh, there's a video that I watched. I can't remember where it was from, but it was talking about how every artist, when you begin creating anything, it's really frustrating because your skills don't match your taste, and you're trying to like get those closer and closer together.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm getting to that point where like my technical skills are developing as I'm developing these games and launching
Hmm.
them, and it's like I feel like I'm building up the foundation of a house, you know, and I'm getting all of the skills and everything, new tools in my belt, so to say. And I feel like my technical skills are now at the point where I'm more concerned about design and marketing and business and trying to make intentional decisions about games that I want to make but will also sell adequately.
Yeah.
Um, so I steer I give a wide berth to the idea of working on a long dream game because I want to get there eventually, but I feel like I have to put in the reps beforehand.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I also consider it being a feeling, like an abstract feeling you have. Like I used to like I've been doing game development for about 4 years now, and I played games for my whole life. And so there's a big gap of time where I play a game and not even consider if I could make it. And once you start making games, you start to look at the games you play a bit differently. And certain things you'll be playing and be like, I have absolutely no idea how they do that. Like I have like Noita, I have no
Hmm.
idea how they made Noita. Like they've talked about it on GDC. I watched the GDC conversation and I'm still like, okay, well, I don't know how I would actually do that. Um, but eventually you have this feeling and you see a game like, I think I could do that. And that abstract feeling then starts to, in my head for me, it then went into the ideas I was having. Because that's like a really important thing is like you have a game idea and like you're talking about, can I execute on it? Because everybody can have ideas. Like you said, I have a journal somewhere back there on that bookshelf full of ideas.
Hmm.
And can you execute on it? Like I feel like game development comes all the way down to like execution of an idea in a good way. And there's a lot we could talk about there. But
Yep.
you'll eventually start getting intuition of like, yeah, I can do this. Or not quite yet. Not quite yet. Maybe if I eventually have funding, so then I can fill somebody out who could do the art asset thing, right? Because that's the other thing aside is like if you can then start hiring people who fill out these slots in the,
Hmm.
someone to just make you a trailer, make you a kick-ass trailer that you can market, right? Someone who could make you a kick-ass. We both used an artist to make our the artwork for our first games, and
Hmm.
those sort of things you can start scaling up to bigger, being like someone who can make me music, someone who could make me art assets, someone who could help you develop things, someone who could do your multiplayer server infrastructure, right?
Yep.
I think some of my like wishes in the future is that I can become a self-funded studio who can hire other people. That would be
Hmm.
so cool if that is the evolution of Aramis Studios. That seeing like Jonas Tyroller do that, where he hired another
Hmm.
developer and then they made Thronefall together, and like they
Hmm.
turned that game around in like a half a year, and now
Yeah.
he's like each game he's released has made more and more and more money. So I feel
Yeah.
like that is the path that we both want to take, is this like iterative growth approach where each time you take a step up, you're leveling up something, maybe design, maybe art, maybe the scale of your team eventually. And then
Hmm.
eventually, I think some of these ideas we have in our notebooks become much more feasible because you have people to help you build them, or you become this god version of an indie game dev.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm trying to learn so many skills myself because I want to know every facet of game development and I want to get better at every facet because I don't want to have to rely on hiring people in the future. Like right now, like my art skills are not very good, but I'm getting a better sense of like style so that I can use simple art implementations and I think it still looks pretty good. You know, and it's like it's the same with everything. I'm not great at marketing, but I'm learning how to use a better voice when talking about my game and posting about it online so that people like can identify with what I'm creating and they like it, you know, and it's just like all these things I'm just trying to, you know, for the longest time I thought game development was all about the code, and I'm realizing that there's so much that goes into it. Um,
You can make a really
yeah,
good game and write trash code
yeah,
very easily. You
exactly.
could write just really bad
Yeah,
code, and if it just works, that's fine,
yep,
right?
exactly. Yep, makes it harder to maintain, but
Yeah.
yep, you could do it.
I I'm also someone who wants to learn a lot about it myself. I think in all parts of my life, whether it's a home improvement project or walking around a Home Depot trying to find a thing, I have a very hard time asking for help. And it annoys me, it annoys my partner, and I think something I will have to square myself with is eventually I'm going to have to ask for, like, seek out more help to make really cool games. Like
Yeah,
really, really cool, successful games, I think, are going to be much more in reach when I ask for help. But I also really love knowing every part about it, and I love like experiencing every part about it, because a lot of my game development journey and like releasing games and stuff for me is an experiential part. Like it's fun to like spend a day being like, okay, I'm not feeling like programming today, but instead I could work on some YouTube shorts, and I could throw together some small marketing things, and I could just post a thing on Reddit because I feel like doing it today. And
hmm,
that's that. And you can have you can still make progress towards something without having to do like a specific task on that day.
yeah, definitely. Do you follow Jake Burkett on Twitter?
I do not.
Okay, he's I think his handle is Alien something. Um, he he's like an OG indie dev. I think that he was originally he wrote uh like a Game of Sutra article about the box lighter number like a decade ago, and like was talking about how to estimate Steam sales. But he's awesome. He just released a game called Regency Solitaire 2,
Hmm.
and I love following him on Twitter because he just seems very wise in how he approaches the business side of indie game development. And one of the things that he brought up recently that I thought was worth considering is he takes the scope of a game that he's considering making and he tries to estimate how much revenue it would bring in versus how long it would take for him to develop it. And he uses like months as his unit of measurement. So he says like, if I spend 2 months on this game, will it bring in 2 months worth of income? And or if I spend 8 months on this game, is it going to bring in 8 months worth of income? And it's interesting when you think about, because I think most indie developers think about it in terms of like over 1 year or less than 1 year. But if you think about it in terms of like months, maybe you can slightly alter your game and it'll only take you 4 months instead of 8 months.
Sure.
But it would bring in 6 months of income either way. So it's like I don't know. It's a very interesting way to think about the sustainability of indie development.
I think art is a good example of that as well, right? Like if I wanted to change my art style, if I do a handcrafted pixel perfect art style, I would have to get better at that. I'd have to grow my skills in that area, execute on it well, and like build this really nice handcrafted pixel experience. Would that be enough to double the amount of months I get out of it, right? If it doubles the length of time, say it goes from 8 months to 16, does that also double the revenue? Or because in my head it doesn't. I don't think it does, but I
Yep.
don't have any. I don't think I have enough experience to be able to come up with any sort of accurate guess of how much I can make versus how much effort
Yeah.
I put into making it. But I really do
Yeah.
like that concept, and I think that's something I'm doing abstractly as I'm making decisions of like, I have 15 months of funding. Okay, I need to at some point I need to break even on that, month in, month out, right? You got to break even or go positive as well.
Yeah. One of my favorite things that I wasn't anticipating being a full-time indie developer is doing my monthly financial reporting. And so I will go bring in, like here's my YouTube ad revenue this month, here's my Xbox sales, here's my Steam sales, here's my PlayStation sales, and like here's my Patreon donations, and I aggregate it, and then I chart it, and I see like, okay, this platform is bringing in this amount of money, and this platform is bringing in this amount of money, and it's like,
It's so
and
fun.
the yeah,
I
it's
enjoy it.
so interesting just trying to like analyze like, oh, and there's a sale event here, so it seems like one off, but when you start looking at it over time, then you see like these patterns emerge, and you can see like what's worth pursuing, and see like as I am going to be deploying more games onto different platforms, it'll be interesting to see if there's trends of like which consoles or platforms deserve to take priority when I am considering porting. So,
I think especially because you've told me that Bridges and Docks is like a halfway point to a new like another game.
mhm.
And especially with that, you're going to get valuable information about different audiences and different platforms and that style of art as a viable, marketable thing. You're going to see some trends and you'll
Yeah,
maybe be able to double down on some of those trends in the next game, which I think is really, really cool.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm very excited to see where that next game goes to.
Getting a game released, you were talking about it earlier too, of like having these small passive drops in the bucket. It having Chess Survivors be something that I'm not putting effort into right now, and having
Hmm.
it go on sale right now this week, and seeing it spike up and have 50 sales or something like that. I'm like, it's like, gosh, I can see how this works. I can see
Yeah,
how if I have the second mining game and it does just as well as Chess Survivors did, right? Like, oh, now you have two of those. And then you work on a third and you have three of them. And then you have four of
exactly.
them. Or you go back and do a 2.0 of one of the other games that were like, oh, the tail of this game is long.
Yeah.
Maybe I should go and reinvest some more time in bringing more life up to that game again, right? And you can start to do that for all of your portfolio. And you could have this portfolio of 5 or 6 games that you just like, this month it's this game again. I'm going to do a little bit more work on this game. Or I've had a weird uptick because a YouTuber played this game. Let me go give this game a patch and like implement some of their feedback because, oh, that's really good feedback and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
I can see with releasing games that you can slowly build out a portfolio of income that eventually equals, it cost. I'm sure you've done the math of how much it costs for Thomas to live on a day on this earth,
Yep.
and including your rent or your mortgage and your food and all that fun stuff.
Hmm.
Um, I can see eventually that filling out that whole pie if you get enough games going, and they don't have to
Yeah.
be hits.
Yeah, exactly. And the crazy thing is that uh like once I launched Tanks But No Tanks, what I've been doing since then is developing more games. But if I had done nothing, if I had been sitting on a beach and drinking a cocktail for, the last 6 months or whatever it's been, then I would still have made the same amount of money from that game. So it's like an interesting, like it's a forward, and it's a the investment is up front. But now that it's once you launch, it's like then it's all passive at that point.
Your ratio between revenue and hours spent starts to increase, right? So it's
Exactly. Yeah.
slowly like the dollar per hour starts to go up where, I think Chess Service probably started in the very low dollar per hour range, and now it's becoming a little bit more reasonable, which is
Yeah.
cool. It's cool to
Yeah.
feel that and see the graph and see those numbers, and like you get it a bit. You get it a bit.
And it's the same thing with YouTube. Like getting my first 100 subscribers was painful, and getting my first 1,000 subscribers was super painful. But then, like, I went from 1,000 to 3,000 relatively quickly, and then I went from 3 to 7,000 subscribers like super fast, just like in a
Yeah.
couple months. And so it's
Yeah.
like yeah, it's interesting to think that I could be working the same amount of hours right now doing the same exact thing that I'm doing, but when I have my back catalog of games that are making sales, then I'm going to be making much more money doing the
I
same
could
amount of
see
work.
it opening us up to like doing a project just for like I have ideas for YouTube games that I could make that would just be good devlogs and stuff like that, but I don't do them because I'm like my big profit center is going to be selling games. But
Yeah.
eventually if I'm not worrying about when my money's going to run out, I could see myself exploring more just like interesting YouTube concepts
Yeah.
because then I could spend a week doing that or 2 weeks doing that, editing a really nice video put together, spending a long time on that, making it feel really cool and polished, making a really like succinct 20-minute video or something like that I would really love to put out there, but that takes me a month to do. And I'm just going to be like, no, I want to focus on doing this other thing.
Yeah.
I could see that eventually being something that we get freed to do in a way where like, because YouTube seems so hard. It's just so challenging, but
so hard. Yeah. Have
also
you
so
do you
fun.
follow Aya, the game
Yeah.
dev?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He rated me a few times,
Oh,
and
nice. Yeah.
I convinced him he's the Aya on Twitch. And I
Uh-huh.
convinced him to try to change it to just the Aya and like submit a nice little like help ticket at Twitch. He got rejected to
Uh,
because it says you have to have 4 letters in your name, but like unless
oh
you're
yeah.
XQC, and then you can have 3.
Okay. Yeah. Well, his YouTube channel is super interesting because he spends so much time on each devlog, and his videos get hundreds of thousands and or millions of views. But then a few months ago, he released a video talking about, I don't know if you watched it, but he worked with a team of developers and they made this super hard like rage platformer game where there was like a monetary prize based off of the view count on the video. And it's like really cool concept, and he put all of this time developing the actual game, putting like a leaderboard system in and like letting people like publishing it, letting people play the game, and it got like 20,000 views, I think. And
Shoot.
it just like for the relative size of his YouTube channel just completely flopped.
Yeah.
And it just makes me think whenever I think about making a game specifically for a video, it's just like the stakes are so high for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that's where it's like my goal with YouTube content is just to get it as quick as possible out the door and
Yeah.
have it just be rough and genuine, just Andy talking to camera, being Aramis and chilling and having a good time, just sharing my progress as a human who's trying to make games. I'm like, your video today was that same vibe in the last few weeks of like the videos you put out are like just Thomas sharing Thomas stuff. And
Yeah.
You've actually had some very nice editing. I think a lot of that comes down to your game just looks so cool in a YouTube
Oh,
video.
thank you. Yeah.
Like it looks great as B-roll. Like it's just,
Yeah.
and you could just be like literally plopping stuff down. I'm like,
Yeah.
it's a pretty good B-roll, and it's all of like 10 seconds of footage. I'm like, that's nice.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that.
I had some more questions here. What are we at for time on this? We're at about 47 minutes. Okay. What is some advice you'd give to someone who might be stuck in the serial prototyping phase and having the goal of like getting a game released, right? Where you kind of getting stuck there and iterating. Maybe if they're not a full-time dev, so they have that like money thing on the side, but just generally like someone stuck in that prototyping hell, we can call it.
Yeah. It's so difficult because there's so much wrapped in that question. It depends on what your goals are, first of all. If you're trying to make money or if you're trying to learn technical skills, I think that your approach to how you develop games are vastly different because I
Sure.
think early on, I think it was beneficial to be in the serial prototyping phase. And like in one of my recent videos, I called them basically tech demos. They weren't games, they were just me messing around seeing what was possible, but I was still learning the technical skills required to make games as I was doing that. But I think that transition out of that period where you have enough skills to make a full game, even if it's super simple, it's a hard one to make.
Yeah.
And what I did is I just made a video about this. I made the absolute simplest game that I could think of, which is you're a ball on the screen, and every time you tap your phone, it just jumps up, and you just have to time your jumps to like avoid obstacles. And it keeps track of how high you got, and that's the entire game. And that was below my skill level at the time, but I intentionally chose something super simple so that I could deal with all of the other things that come on top of that, which is like UI and title screen and music and options and save system and publishing and creating store assets, coming up with like a compelling description for your store page,
Mm-hmm.
learning how to sign your builds and upload them. It's like there's so much that goes into publishing a game. And so I think my number one tip would be just make a game that's extremely small. And if you're in the middle of a game project right now and you can't wrap it up within the next month, then I would say shelve it and then make a really small game and then come back to your current project.
And it doesn't have to be publishing it on Steam or anything like that important either. You could do it
Mhm.
on you could dress up something and put it on itch.io and like that's a very easy publishing platform and then be able to like give it to friends, right? I
Yep.
think that's something that is really helpful as far as a learning moment that you get from publishing something that you don't get from serial prototyping is like giving it to somebody else. And you can do that in the prototyping phase too of like publishing something on Reddit and saying, "Hey, this is my first project. What do you guys think? What should I add next?" And just like seeing like emotionally experiencing the feeling of people looking at your work and
Yep.
telling you stuff about it is very, very scary. But ultimately, for me, one of the most rewarding parts is like seeing people care about what you do
Yep.
to write like 2 paragraphs about it. Like that's insane that someone sat down for in like structured sentences to give you feedback, right? Like
Yeah.
in an age where it's so much easier just to downvote something, they're like, I'm gonna spend some time and like share my thoughts, right? Like
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
always been very meaningful for me. So that's something I would say as well about of just like there's a lot you get out of publishing, even a small game like that. You might give it a crappy name, you might give it a crappy description, but you've at least started to work through those like different topics. So then the next time you publish something you care a little bit more about and you have a bigger, maybe you do want to make money from it, you have something to fall back on of like, this is what I did last time. Here's how I worked through coming up with names for a game. Here's
Mhm.
how I did that. Maybe this time I'm going to do something like that, but a little bit differently and
Mhm.
try to come up with a better name.
Yeah, definitely. And uh I would say also back to it depends on what your goals are. For me, when I was transitioning out of serial prototyping, I was also very intent on getting a full-time job in the games industry. And so part of that meant building up a polished looking portfolio that I could send to potential employers.
Yeah.
And being on both sides of it, both as an applicant and being a part of the hiring process for interviewing people, um, candidates that come in and have published games on like a like Steam or the App Store or something like that, that it automatically jumps them into a separate category from people who send me a zip file of their game project or their
Right.
GitHub
Here's a key to the game.
repository.
It's on Steam. You can play it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It just sets you yeah, it's a whole different category, I think.
That's heartwarming as someone who I've never applied for a game job in my life. But who has I would say I have a decent portfolio of work that I could share with people.
Yep.
If it ever comes time that I want to go work for a studio, it has to be the right studio or the right developer who's reaching out to me. But that is heartwarming to hear that like when you're on the interviewing side, that makes a big difference. Because I know how it feels to hire Salesforce engineers and
Yeah.
what I look for on that, but I'm like, I don't want more jobs as a Salesforce engineer.
Yeah. And there's been a lot more job postings recently for Godot developers. It's cool
Mm-hmm.
that that engine has so much momentum behind it right now.
Slay the Spire. Let's
I
go.
know, yeah. I wanted to ask you though, do you have any intentions for targeting platforms other than Steam? I know that it can get a little sticky with the console situation when it comes to working in Godot, but I know there's also other PC-centric platforms like GOG or Humble Bundle or the Epic Store.
Mm-hmm.
Have you considered any of those?
No. Should I?
Yeah.
Yeah, I should for sure. I haven't considered any of it. I don't have a good reason why I haven't. Even console porting and stuff like that. I think in my head, those decisions are going to be made if the game sells well enough on Steam.
Yep.
And that is following, there's some assumptions there and things like that. But I think if it, again, I don't have a number even, but if I have a feeling and a general vibe, then I will look into, hiring someone else to help me out. And that could be how much money I make from it. If I'm like, shit, now my funding is done sometime in 2027 because my game did very, very well. Yes, let's start hiring people to help me port to these different engines. And like with Godot, that would be maybe hiring W4 to help console port stuff over, or looking at Epic Games, or looking at all those different, like even just within PC itself, like looking at those different platforms. I don't know why I haven't thought about that at all for Chess Survivors and stuff like that, because Chess Survivors has sold decently well on Steam. It's just, I'm moving forward, I guess, and just wanting to work on a new game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense.
Definitely not console porting for Chess Survivors, because some people ask for that. I'm like, I don't think the controller support is good enough to sell on a console. So I think if I want to do console porting, I have to make sure that the game plays really good on a controller.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I'm not looking forward to after launching Bridges and Docks, because with my previous game, Tanks But No Tanks, I started with controller support from day one, and that was my primary testing input.
And it feels good on a controller.
Yeah, for sure. But with Bridges and Docks, there's no controller support right now. There's a much more complicated UI. You have to go through these different menus, and I'm trying to figure out how to make that intuitive with a controller. So that's going to be post Steam launch that I integrate that. But yeah, we'll see how it goes.
I think that's a lesson I learned from Chess Survivors, was that like in the back of my head, I had an idea for like controller support, and I like, as I'm working on the mining game, I want to it's in the back of my brain, but I also kind of just want to make a really good game and not have to worry about that. Like at the end, then I can be like, okay, let's do some controller support. But there's still in the voice in my head where like these things could be done differently with controller. And I wonder if it's not going to be like UI menus and stuff like that, having specifically built menus that are controller menus. And like later just saying, here was what I did for, this is, if you're using mouse and keyboard, this is the menu that pops up. And if you're using controller, this is the menu pops up. Because I had a really, really hard time having one UI do both. It felt, I feel like, because I've used controllers before that have like, oh, this menu was like designed for controller first, and you're using it in the mouse, you're like, this is kind of weird on a mouse, right? And I think instead of trying to do a UI design that works for both, there could be and I've just came up with this idea now, but there could be a world where you do separate UIs for both of them.
Yeah, definitely.
That might be something I do. I should write that down. Someone chat, write that down.
Yeah.
That's all the questions I had. Did you have anything else on your list of questions for each other?
So. Yeah, I think that's all I got.
Cool. We can open it up to chat. Someone in chat did mention some questions a bit earlier. Here we go. Where do you guys think is a nice place / platform to release your first mod / demo / game on? Ooh, that's a good one. I've actually heard that advice before, is that instead of making a game for your first time, make a mod for a game, and you can start to learn the infrastructure of how other games are designed and built. That could be a really good path, and I think Steam Workshop would probably be a good one. I've never built mods. I've never made mod support for my games. Yeah. But I think that could be a pretty interesting one for a first game.
Yeah. I think when I look at publishing something for the first time, I always try and lower the barrier of entry. I try and take the bare minimum approach to everything that I do, so that it's as seamless as possible when I'm trying to learn it initially. And so I would choose something like the Android App Store or Itch, or Steam is more complicated than Itch for sure, but it's not terrible. I would stay away from the iPhone. I would stay away from console porting. And those are the places that I would probably go first.
I will say, thinking back to releasing Chess Survivors on Steam, it feels really, really cool to be able to send your friends who do play on Steam your game, and say, here's my Steam page for my game. It is a very cool feeling. It feels like you're a real game developer. I have a lot of imposter syndrome with game dev, but for some reason, having something on Steam makes me feel more real. And I remember sharing the link with my friends and then being like, wait, this is your, oh my gosh, this looks so cool. Right?
Yeah.
Like that feels really satisfying. So depending on what you're going for, itch is going to be your lowest barrier to entry. I feel like Android, I was this close to an Android release. I probably still could go press the release button.
Mhm.
But I agree that some of those platforms are going to be much easier than others. Next question. You had another question as well in here. What engines have you guys used or tried during your prototyping times? I'll let you take this one first there, Mr. Unity.
Yeah. So I've been using Unity for, when did I start? 2018, I think. So like 6 years. And that, but before that, I initially started with a Java library called libgdx, which let you export Java builds of your game to uh, HTML and a bunch of different uh, platforms. And I made like a little asteroids clone. That was what I did. That I've messed around in Game Maker. I've made little prototypes in Game Maker. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else. I've opened Unreal, but I didn't. I just left because I'm like, yeah. So I I don't think I haven't tried Godot, and honestly, the biggest reason why is because of their lack of console support, and I feel like I'm gonna need to rely on being able to port to consoles to financially sustain myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if they get there, I would consider changing. I think that it's, from what I've seen, Godot seems like a great platform, and if you, it's prop. I feel like it's just so close for me to be like wholeheartedly recommending it to new game developers, but I feel like there's so much tutorials and content out there for Unity that it's like really easy to just say, yeah, Unity is probably the easiest to learn because
Yeah.
there's so many forums and a long history and it's like super stable. And but I personally, I would, it depends on what kind of games you want to make too. If you want to make like high fidelity first person shooter games, then you should use Unreal. But if you want to make like what you would maybe think of like as a quintessential indie game, I would choose either Unity or Godot. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I did Unity when I first started learning. I started with Bracky's tutorials and stuff like that. And then DevDuck posted a video of him switching his game from Unity to Godot. And I switched to Godot. I was like, cool, I follow that creator. I'm going to switch to, and haven't really looked back. But I said this yesterday on the stream as well, that the only real reason I can give you why I keep using Godot is that I'm just comfortable with it. It's really hard for me to untangle my love for making games with the engine I use, because I did 3 months of Unity and I've done almost 4 years of Godot now. And to untangle those out, it's just, I don't think I could do that very easily. So
Yeah.
that's about it, right? And I don't think, back in college, I explored some frameworks and stuff like that. But I don't think I ever had actual like a game engine installed in college.
Mhm.
I
Did
think
you see
go ahead. Sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think my exploration of other engines will be done through YouTube videos, like Good Gifts videos, where he's like, I built a game in Scratch and here's my
Yeah.
experience. Because I think it would be helpful, especially as I stream, as people come in, to have some sort of opinion. Because right now my answer is like, go pick an engine and just start learning. And if it's like gun to head, I would probably say go use Unity. Like, go use Unity and go watch Bracky's videos on tutorial. Like, they're great. They're old, but they're great, and I'm sure they hold up perfectly fine for like
Yeah.
what a current version of Unity is. I'm sure most of the stuff he talks about is probably still the same concepts, but that would be my
Yep.
recommendation. You
Have
were
you
gonna say
seen
something?
yeah, Pontypants's newest devlog? You know, he just made that climbing game
Mm-hmm.
uh based off of what's that cauldron game?
Getting over
Getting
it.
over it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you see uh his prototype that he initially started in Godot? I thought that was so funny. He was like,
He
"Yeah, I had to go back to Unity."
in midtime he's like, what I've been showing you is me recreating it in Unity, which is interesting. His first game was actually an Unreal game as well. So he went from
Hmm.
Unreal with Punch a Bunch to a difficult game about climbing is built in Unity. He checked out Godot. I think one of the hard things about Godot 3D is you have to really start understanding how 3D works for the game to look decent. Where I think
Hmm.
default Unity settings can make a 3D game look really good. And that's what he showed in the
Hmm.
video too. He's like, I'll use the default everything and it looks fine. Where I've messed around in
Hmm.
Godot 3D and it's like, you have to start learning a lot more to make it look like I've seen really, really good high fidelity Godot 3D games and stuff. I just have no idea how to do that.
Yeah.
Where I think Unity, you could get something that looks really pleasing to you pretty quickly. Again, having never done it, I think that's my vibe check.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think Unreal is even easier out of the box just to
Yeah.
have something that looks real nice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. What else? We have some more questions in here. Mick says, what are your thoughts about key features to keep an interest for your game for a long time? In your humble opinion, multiplayer and modding support help. Key
Hmm.
features. I think generally my goal with my games is that for every dollar you spend, you get an hour of fun out of it. That's my general rule of thumb. But then you have like the journey the journey exception where journey is a 2 hour game that costs $10 to $20 and it's worth every penny because it's a beautiful experience. So
Hmm.
that's my general goal. I'm not too worried about building a game that someone plays for a very long time. I think my general goal will be like you buy it and you get 10 hours of fun from it or 5 hours of fun, or you like my content, you buy it and you get an hour of fun. You give it a thumbs up on Steam and you use it to support me as a creator. That would also be an okay use case of my games.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, the AAA studios have figured out that the way to make a bajillion dollars is to make a game as a service
Mm-hmm.
and to do season passes and to foster that community so that people keep coming back and they're focused on retention. And that's not how I see the games that I make, for a number of different reasons. One, I think that some of the tactics that they use to bring people back can be predatory, and also I think as a creator, I would feel uh, like dried up creatively if I was stuck supporting the same game for a long time.
Yeah,
So I mean, yeah, like multiplayer and modding support would be really, really cool, and I would consider doing like that's the number one feature that was requested for Tanks but No Tanks is online multiplayer. And there would be so much that has to be added and rewritten for that to work, and
sure.
I would do it if there was enough interest in it.
Yeah,
But there just hasn't been enough market interest, which is, I think, one of the things that's interesting about putting a price tag on your game is that people vote with their dollars, right? And so it's like if this, it's easy to figure out, oh, this isn't worth adding online multiplayer to because there's not enough interest in it. So
yeah. That is a plus of releasing a game is you start to learn those a bit more. Right? Those lessons of like it gives you a concrete in an abstract problem of is it worth it to do something? It starts giving you these toeholds to like stand on to understand how you would even begin to say is it worth it to do that or not.
hmm.
Like that. I think modding support would be cool because think of like Minecraft. Minecraft has so much depth as a game because a lot of people just play modded Minecraft, and there's like you can play almost every genre in Minecraft if you find the right mods for it, and it gives it
Yeah.
this huge life. Games like Civ 6 have a lot of mods as well that can change how the game plays, or even just like do quality of life things that the developers haven't done themselves. So
Mhm.
I have no idea how you do mod support. I think it'd be fun to do, but it's definitely going to be in the dot 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 maybe scope. Like
Yeah.
it'd have to be I would have to see a lot of fun in the game already and see a lot of like financial success for it to then want to put in mods or multiplayer.
Yeah.
Same sort of answer you gave.
Yeah. I think Bridges and Docks specifically would be a really good game to add mod support because I think it would be enticing for players to be able to drag in their own 3D models or animals with animations or,
Sure.
use that existing infrastructure and just add their own assets and be able to make, themed like, maybe we have like uh people want to add like Japanese architecture or like Viking ships, and just be able to like put that into the game. And I think that would be, I would consider doing that for sure. But again, it would just have to be proven out that people have an interest in it.
I think you can also build games like a puzzle game that I was trying to build. The Fibonacci's Final Sequence would have been a really good target for puzzles. Like Opus Magnum has mods, and each mod is just a different puzzle. And you could install all these different puzzles, and all of a sudden the game has 30 puzzles, but then the mods out there have thousands of puzzles. And you can all of a sudden like give you this real deep replayability of just playing some of the top mods out there. And then you can give that away, right? You couldn't build in-engine tools to mod stuff like that. I think then you get into like this whole content, like having to manage content and like having to scrub and like admin out all the dicks that people draw in your tools and stuff like that. It's like a haha funny thing, but it's like legitimately you have to figure out how, like, do you hire a lawyer so that someone makes a terms and service agreement so that if you create a mod on there, then you say, I'm not, if you see a penis on here, it's not my fault, right? Like, that's a legitimate concern and question.
Every platform, when you apply with a game, has a question about if your game contains user-generated content, because it makes the rating of the game very different for obvious reasons.
There's a Apple TV show called Mythic Quest, I believe.
Oh yeah.
And they're building an MMO in there. And one of the episodes in season 1, they talk about T2D. It's their metric for time to dick. And they have a shovel that they want to build so they can do terrain deformation. And they're talking about playtesting, and they're like, this is by far the fastest T to dick, like time to dick. Like, we gave it to players and they just immediately, that's the first thing they do is they dig a dick into the ground. And you're like, funny, but also like from a game developer and studio perspective, you have to think about those things in a serious manner, right? Like you could see someone's parent coming in like suing you and you losing your whole studio and all the money you've made from your games, maybe your house if you don't legally set it up correctly because you offended somebody by them downloading a dick mod that is unintentional.
Yeah, exactly.
You didn't do it, but
that's why I didn't add Steam Workshop integration with Bridges and Docks. It's literally the quintessential game for something like Steam Workshop, because it's like a level editor, and you would want to share those levels. But instead what I did is I just used generic, well, for one, the save files are JSON files. So if you want to go in to the directory and you can share that JSON file with somebody and they can load it up if you want to share with friends, for sure. But then I also made it's experimental right now, but it seems to be working pretty good. It's an OBJ exporter, so you can take your creation that you make in the game and export it to a .obj file, so you can bring it into a 3D modeling tool afterwards. You can bring it into your own game if you want, and just have that 3D model as like a way to share what you've created in the game. And I think I like that more because it's like in standard formats that people can share if they want to, but I am not in charge of something that's officially sponsored, as a part of the game.
Yeah. Or you could throw that into Blender then, and someone could like take that as the basic design and then like zhuzh it up in Blender and make it look, make it shine and sparkle in a different way, or, slap different colors on it and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so
make their own materials and stuff. Yeah, for sure.
That'd be very cool.
One of the biggest things that I've heard multiple people talk about in terms of this game is that they want to use it as a map creator for their D&D campaigns.
Oh yeah. Hell yeah.
Yeah. So like I added a screenshot tool too, so you just hit the screenshot tool and then it takes a picture of what you're looking at and saves it in like 4K resolution without any of the UI. And I think it'll be really cool to see what people make with it.
Absolutely. That'd be very
user generated content.
That'd be fun to like see in your Discord and stuff, see screenshots coming in of stuff like that. I still get shocked when I see a screenshot of my game on someone else's computer. I'm like, oh shit, like other people are playing this game. Like it's a very rewarding experience.
100%.
We had some more questions coming in. Thank you all for asking questions. I appreciate that. If you have more questions, you can keep asking them. I don't know if we'll get to all of them by the time we don't have an end time for this, but eventually we will stop talking, I suppose. Anchor Smashing asked, Aramis mentioned the demo early access release framework for managing scope creep. Does Thomas have a concrete strategy for locking down the scope without killing flexibility?
Yeah. I when I quit my job, I was Mr. Type A, organized deadlines, like make a due date and stick to it no matter what. And then I had a baby and everything changed. And so Bridges and Docks was supposed to come out in like January or February. And I have just had to come to terms with the flexibility needed for being a new dad and also working with sleep deprivation, and just like having grace with myself in that way. So I've become much more flexible, and I actually am not sticking to deadlines as much as I did. Now I'm just trying to make sure that when I have the ability to work, I am being diligent with that time and
Yeah.
working on the things that will bring me forward. And I've flexed my hours some, so I've actually really enjoyed working from like 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. and just having those couple extra hours where like everybody else in the house is asleep and I can just like concentrate. Um, but yeah, I haven't done anything concerning early access or demos, mostly because early access is usually for games that uh, have a longer development timeline than what I'm working with, and demos are most useful with like the Steam Next Fest,
Yeah.
which also to register for the Steam Next Fest you have to register long beforehand. And again, because I'm working on games that I'm only trying to spend a handful of months on, I actually started working on my current game after the registration closed for the Steam Next Fest, and I originally was going to launch it before the Steam Next Fest occurred. So it was like in between the registration and the event that I was working
Mm-hmm.
with. So it just doesn't make sense. So
That's an interesting consequence of trying to make smaller games, is that because you have like for the October Next Fest, which is my target, you have to be in by July.
yeah,
You have to have a game published by July and a name published by July, but like in that sort of time frame, you might not have any of that ready yet because you might be just starting, or having a 3-month turnaround on a game. It doesn't give you any sort of enough time, which is interesting. Very different like perspectives, and neither one is good or bad.
yeah,
They're
exactly.
just different, which I think is cool.
Yeah.
Which I appreciate about the conversations is we're doing similar things through different methods, and we can learn and help each other min-max for like efficient time use is something that's always in the back of my head with everything I'm doing. It's like, is there a way for me to make this more efficient without sacrificing so much quality? Very similar to that, like month of time, is that equal month of value? Like
Right.
YouTube and stuff, it's like, I think for what I'm making, if I can just do it much quicker and like open up my camera and do a one take Andy and just do it, like that is so much better than me sitting down for like 5 hours trying to get the perfect take,
Yeah.
of saying something. That is just, the time value proposition there for me and my abilities isn't quite there yet.
Yeah.
And it probably like I would do that and the video would get 100 views. So
Yeah, exactly. It was such a light bulb moment to me when I spent one day just selfie videoing with my phone and just describing what I was going to do that day, and then literally not even doing a screen capture but pointing my phone at my monitor with its crappy quality and just pointing at the screen and describing what I was doing. That devlog that I made in one day, a one day turnaround with recording, editing, posting, got just as many views as my previous devlog that I spent a long time, getting good screen captures, writing a script, doing good audio quality, all of that.
there's a certain charm to scuff
Yeah.
that I think makes stuff feel very genuine. Like I think YouTube, there's a needle where like the type of content we're making, you don't want to be super refined in a way. You want a little bit of scuff because like we're not making this documentary type situation. I've been like binge watching the channel Jetlagged, where they have to do basically like Amazing Race type situations where they're playing these mini games and having to use public transportation to travel all over the world. And there's scenes where they're just like their camera's filming them and they're just like running, and the screen is it's incredibly hard to watch, and it's hard, but it's like it feels like you're with them on this adventure doing this crazy shit. And there's some moments where it's just like really scuffed audio, really scuffed moments, but it really brings you into this present moment. And I think some of that, of like literally taking your camera and be like, here's what I'm working on, brings you into the moment with Thomas as he's doing game development in a really genuine way. I thought it was very effective when you used it. Should the whole video be that? No, but it can also be a tool that you use as saying, oh, I did this cool thing, I need to quickly just record it and not think too much about it. And
yeah, exactly.
Boom, you can move forward with your day and keep making the video.
Mm-hmm.
We had some more questions in here. Moonshot says, how closely are you looking at AI tools for stuff like assets and copy for game descriptions for stores and stuff? I'll let you handle that one first, Thomas. AI.
Yeah.
AI and game dev.
I don't have any interest in AI as far as it comes to asset generation. There's like people have conflicting morals about the integrity of where the AI has sourced its data from. But even from a practical perspective, Steam is flagging anything that gets uploaded with AI generated content. So I think even at a practical level, it'll be difficult to navigate when that's okay to use and when it isn't. I will say AI has been very useful for me in two primary regards. One is programming complex math. So when I go into ChatGPT and I say, okay, here's like some like angles that I'm trying to figure out. Here's the camera, and I want this to move this direction in relation with this, and it helps to usually I have to massage it a bit because the first thing it gives me doesn't work. But I've had a couple things, like especially with like camera stuff, that has helped me with programming. And the second thing that is super useful for me is for different platforms that you publish a game on. Sometimes you're required to have localized store descriptions, and I found that using AI to do its best translation of my store descriptions and then spit it out in a CSV so that I can just like drag it into the thing. Its localization has been awesome. I mean, ideally I would like to use a localization service, and I would if it was in-game content, but if it's just like here's the sub headline for what the game is about, I'll like use AI to translate it, and then I'll do a couple sanity checks and rerun it through Google Translate to see if the English matches what it was originally, and that's been good enough for me. So those are the two ways that I've used it.
I definitely use Google Translate in a spreadsheet to do my in-game translations. Someone who spoke Portuguese actually reached out to me and said, hey, your Portuguese translations are bad. Can I change it? And nice. I was like, I can't pay you, but I can absolutely give you a thanks and the credits. And they're like, sure. And so I gave them my sheet and they walked through and they asked me some questions and stuff like that. I would probably, as a default, it's like, I don't know if having in-game translations, even if they're shitty AI ones, is better than none.
Yeah.
I'm not sure on that, but it is something that I would like in my next game to think about translations and localization a bit more than just using a Google Translate sheet. But it is a good and easy, quick, cheap tool to get something there. I agree with that. I did use it was a art tool or a music tool for AI generation that had used a bunch of seeding from artists who were part of this collective or something like that. It's all like sourced. It wasn't just like ripped audio for generating that. And I used that tool it's actually kind of a cool tool. It lets you like spit out based off of a few like pre-selected things. You could pick out, I want this, vibe, this genre, and then it would spit out a bunch of different choices. And you could go through and click one you liked and then further manicure it by like changing the bass lines or the notes. And you could like really get down to like this basically like configurable songs. And I did that for the soundtrack of Chess Survivors, and it worked pretty well. Like the music in Chess Survivors is not bad. and I would consider that again just because it was a very cheap solution and it was a AI tool that felt like it wasn't a shitty one. There's like ethical AI tools out there that are like, oh yeah, the artists are getting paid based off of what you're paying for. I'd consider that again for music, at least for maybe the early access music. And then if there's like more success, coming back in and redoing the music by hiring a composer or something like that could be interesting. Because one of the downsides is people kept asking like, can I buy the soundtrack? And it says specifically in the license, like I can't resell it. I could use it for YouTube videos. I could use it for games and stuff, but you can't sell it as a standalone thing. And I was like, okay. So people do like, and apparently they do buy soundtracks for games off of Steam, which is interesting. So
that sounds like a really fun tool to play with.
It was. Because it's like a monthly subscription, so I subscribed it for $20 for a month, and then I like just messed around with it for just hours, coming up with like a bunch of ones I enjoyed, just different vibes and different sounds and stuff like that. So I think that's also how I came up with the trailer music, which I'm also happy with, because you can lengthen and shorten different things to make them kind of have a nice curve of like, increasing intense moment or like a downbeat where you then like pull out the bass or you make the bass like muted in the background and stuff like that. So it was a sweet tool. I would consider it again. I'll let you know more about it off stream if you care about the actual tool. I can't think of the name right now off the top of my head.
Cool.
Yeah. What other questions did we have, gang? Maybe a couple more questions. When you're getting started on a new game, what features should you not bother with until later on? Sound, music, art, etc. ?
I will say I always leave sound and music for last. And I think that's, it makes sense. It's not worth adding like a stinger for an action that you might remove later, I guess. But recently I did a collaboration with the Blackthorn Prod YouTube channel, and they've done 2 of these now where they had a game dev competition with like 3 weeks long with a monetary prize at the end. And I was a judge for both of them. And when I was judging the contestants' submissions for games, it made such an enormous difference, the ones that had music and sound effects.
Yeah.
And so it's like it doesn't really matter because if you're developing a game and you're going to publish it, you can do music first or you can do it last, because it doesn't matter what somebody's going to play it at the end anyway. But for things like if you have people who are going to be playing it, maybe play testers, or your community is going to be playing it, or even if you're making a video about like a devlog about it, I think adding sounds and music actually makes a bigger difference than what I had initially thought. So
I would say that if you want to feel good about your games and like you need that, like developer art can sometimes like hide how fun a game is. If you're just focusing on like implementing a mechanic and you just have simple boxes and circles running around, it can be really hard to like see the forest through the trees. Is that the right saying? Where you can picture the whole thing when you're just looking at a shitty like box tree in front of you. It's hard to like feel good about what you're doing. I find myself like going back and forth between like, okay, let's refine some of the art and UI a little bit. Let's go back and like, let's add some sound effects. If you want to feel good about your game sooner and you're having a struggle, like feeling like what you're making is decent, just slap in some art, some sound assets. It'll make any animation all of a sudden pop off the screen so much more than you'd ever think. But I've ignored music until the very end, just because it even helps. Like music helps set the tone and the vibe of the area, which could be useful to like at least explore and think about how you would maybe tonally do things. But like in my mining game, like putting in mining sounds, it made it feel like actually impactful to hit something and hear a tinking noise, even if it's the same tinking noise again and again and again, to get that like proof of concept of like the feel of a game Sound effects do quite a bit, and I think are worth maybe considering sooner than you would expect. And like in Bridges and Docks, plopping stuff down with a little boop, 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 like it's very satisfying.
Yeah, and that was the major complaint that when Thomas Brush played the early demo version of Bridges and Docks on his live stream, that was like
Yeah.
his major complaint. He's like, man, there needs to be music. So he put his own music on the background. He's like, man, I just want it to go like boop, 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 you know?
Yeah, and you're like, perfect, I will
Um,
do just that.
yeah, exactly. Have you played Boomerang Fu?
Have I? No, I have not. I think you might have mentioned that before.
It's, yeah,
Boomerang.
it was one of the major competitor analysis games that I did for Tanks But No Tanks because
Ah,
it's a
yes.
similar like local multiplayer arcade battle sort of game.
Mm-hmm.
But I listened to a podcast with the developer, an interview with the developer. It was a solo dev, and he said it took him 5 years to make that game, and for like 4 years, everything was cubes. He didn't have any art. All he cared about was the feel of the game and the
Yeah.
gameplay. So it
Yeah.
was cubes, and they weren't throwing boomerangs, they were throwing little cubes, and it was just like everything was like gray boxed cubes. And then at the end, he hired an artist to fill in the art and make it thematically appropriate.
Which there's something there of like not putting sound in, not putting these like polish on something and making sure at a baseline it feels good. But it's like emotionally, I have a hard time doing that. I think that's where my brain is like, my goal is to get a game published. And part of that is I'm an emotional being and I need to feel good about what I'm working on. And I need to feel it a bit more. I have a hard time having this just like this faith that eventually it'll look good enough. But I could like, there's part of me that really wants to be that like hardcore developer that's like, no, I'm just going to make sure that even though they're cubes, the cubes are still fun to jump around. And then eventually we'll do the art stuff and it'll go from like feels really good to now like this crazy height of like looks and feels really good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just an emotional being. I need to feel good
Yep,
about what I'm
aren't we
working
all?
on. So
Mm-hmm.
that's cool. Did we come up? I don't think we came up with a concrete answer of what not. Maybe we both agree music can wait. I think
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
music can
I think
wait.
so.
And even
And
sounds
there's
right away when you're prototyping, probably not that important. Like,
yeah, and
yeah.
like you know, for my games, I have a localization system where I put all of the text in the game into a spreadsheet, and I
Mm-hmm.
have all of my UI and read off of this spreadsheet.
Yep.
You don't need to do that. You can do that later. You can just use the text objects and just, you kind of save yourself if you do it as you go, but I wouldn't concentrate on it if you're,
But not that much time either, right? To like
yeah,
go through your whole project. Assuming it's a smaller project, it's not too hard to then go and like create localization keys and stuff like that. It just
yeah,
might be really boring. Like I remember doing
yeah,
that for Chess Fires. I was like, this is boring. Like
yeah,
I'm not enjoying my time right now. But it's also not hard to do in retrospect. Even like you said, controller support. You could build it from the ground up with controller and keyboard and mouse and design, or you could just like focus on like running toward a gameplay loop and then eventually later doing controller support and stuff like that.
yeah.
Like a
One
save
thing that
game
I've,
state is probably something you can ignore as well.
yeah,
Like saving a
definitely.
game, you don't need to do that.
Yeah. One thing that I always start with though now is like the game flow. Like I always add a title screen first because having like
Hmm.
what I call my core game manager, like I don't know how it works in Godot, but in Unity you can have multiple scenes loaded at the same time. And so I have what I call my base scene, and it doesn't have anything except for things that are universal to the game. It's like the music manager and like maybe like the pause menu maybe, but
Yeah.
and just like a lot of things that are core to the game. And the base scene loads in the title scene, and then once you click play on the title scene, the base scene loads in the core game. Just having that as like a structure for me to build the game in helps a lot.
It's a little thing to like make it feel like you're actually making a game in a way, It
Yeah,
gives it that formalized structure and it can be weird to not have a title screen.
yeah,
Right? It
yeah.
just feels that then it feels like more like a prototype in a way, for sure.
Mhm.
What other questions we got? Ads are about to run, chat, so I'm gonna keep chatting with Thomas here. We'll wrap up the devlog in a couple minutes here and keep the stream going. But other questions that were in chat. Let's see. Mm, I think that's mostly it. Cool.
Cool.
Did you have any closing thoughts or anything like that on releasing
No.
games?
Yeah, I thought that this was a great podcast. I mean, it's games are meant to be released, so that's like how I feel, and just doing what it takes to figure out how to bring your games to the finish line. It's super hard. Most people don't do it. The majority of developers on Steam only publish one game,
Yeah,
so I think it's like trying to break that mold and being somebody who can put the reps in is something that I'm trying to do.
I agree. How did you find emotionally releasing your first game? Like
I hated
getting
it.
that done and like what did you feel like after it was done?
Yeah, I hated it. I I was glad to be done with all of like the marketing stuff and the finalization, and like I was worried that I would launch it and then it would be filled with bugs and people would just be sending me bug reports and crashes that I didn't know how to solve. That's not what happened. But I didn't actually, yeah. It was emotionally exhausting and I didn't care for it. I was much more excited to start the next project.
Sure, which makes sense. I How did I feel? I felt pretty weird because I was going back into being a full-time dev again. So
Oh
just
yeah.
like I hit this like huge depression point of like God, I failed. I sucked. I didn't make a good game. Um, but I think ultimately speaking, like it feels very rewarding to have something out there, and have checked off that box because I think there's even a lot of YouTubers and stuff that I'm like, you have so many viewers and so many like subscribers and you have so many big videos, and I'm like, you don't have a game out there though. It gives me this
Hmm.
little like badge of honor of like at least I've had a game that got released and people paid me for, which I think makes me, it's like in a vein of like feeling like an imposter all the time. It's something that gives me like this like checkbox, like you did it. Like no one can deny, not that anyone's denying I'm a game developer, but like to myself, like I did it. I have a game out there, which I think is fun.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I had a comment on my YouTube channel the other day, um, but I can't remember what it said exactly, but they were basically like, I love that you are actually making and releasing games. Like so many game dev YouTubers aren't doing that, and they find this viewer found a lot of value in just following what I was doing, which was cool.
Yeah. Little comments like that go a long way. Start leaving them on more YouTube channels, everybody. If you watch a YouTube video and you like it, we all read them, we see them, and a little one of like thank you for making the content goes a long way. I do it on the videos I watch these days because I'm like I know how much it helps,
Hmm.
like mentally
Yeah.
speaking. So
Be sure to thank your local YouTuber.
absolutely, absolutely. Cool. I feel good about that. Did you
Yeah.
have any outro prepared or anything you want to say as the
No,
quote unquote host?
no, I mean, I think it's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. I don't know what our runtime is at, but I feel like we had a good conversation. We covered a lot of
Hour
ground.
37. It's pretty good.
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Looking forward to doing our next one. I don't know what we're going to chat about, but it's always good to catch up with you, see how you're making your progress on your mining game. Um, yeah, I think that's it. If you be sure to, if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to check out the Aramis Twitch channel where we live stream this live and you get to watch Aramis program his mining game and take suggestions in real time, which is a lot of fun. Also, be sure to wishlist Bridges and Docks because it's coming out in 11 days.
11
And
days? Hell yeah. That's so
yep,
exciting.
that's it. Yeah,
Cool.
I've been sending out Steam keys to influencers and stuff, so I'm hoping people will get ready to do some coverage for it, but we'll see. Yeah.
That's very exciting. I'm excited for
Yeah.
you. I can't wait. Alrighty. Thank you, Thomas.
Cool, cool. See you later.